Hello everyone. I wanted to provide a little background information on Dyskolos, the play by Menander that we're going to be discussing on Monday, and the only Greek comedy we're going to read this semester. Now this is going to make the most sense if you've already watched the background video for New Comedy, which is available as a page in your Canvas page. And if you have the play in front of you somehow. We'll be talking about the characters and just a little bit about Menander, so you might want to have the play open in front of you to make some notes. I'm also going to remind you that there's a reading guide for the play in your folder in Canvas that's called Reading Guides in your Files tab. So I'm trying to give you a lot of background information since we haven't met in class recently, and this isn't the perfect system. I prefer for us to do this face-to-face, of course, but we're going to try to do the best that we can. Okay, so regarding Dyskolos, there's just a few things that I want to talk about in this particular video. The first is a little bit about the author Menander and why he's so important. And then the second part will be laying out the cast of characters for the play, because I find that this tends to be the most confusing part of understanding new comedies. So unlike Greek tragedies that are based on myths, there's not a lot of background for the story itself. The stories of New Comedy, as you'll know from the other PowerPoint, are really based in the average everyday Athenian's life. They're all about a young man who's in love and trying to find a way for him to marry the girl he wants to marry. But there aren't any mythological stories related to this. There isn't variants of myths that we need to take into account. There's no Trojan War that we need to know all of the events of. It's really everyday life, so we can come to each play fresh without having to have some background to consider, which is nice. So without that sort of history hanging over us, we can focus a little bit more on the characters, and that's what we'll do. Okay, but first a little bit about Menander and his role in New Comedy. So a little, we know, and I've mentioned this in the last PowerPoint, that comedies were performed in Athens and in Greece from about 500 BCE all the way up to about 292 BCE, which is when Menander dies, and probably well after that. So of those, roughly 200 years or so of history of comedies, we know that there are hundreds and hundreds of comedies produced in that time period, and we have the names of many of the authors who wrote those plays. But from all of that vast treasure of information and of playwriting and of innovation, we today have only 13 whole plays. 11 of those plays are by Aristophanes, and they fall under the heading of Old Comedy. So you'll remember that those are the comedies that are more about the politics and the contemporary issues of the day, and they're a little bit raunchy, they're satiric, they're biting. But the two other plays that we have are by Menander, and Menander falls under the New Comedy title. So Dyskolos is really his most complete play, and that was discovered only in 1959, so we haven't had this play very long. It was discovered on a manuscript that we thought was lost. And another one of his plays that we have that's almost complete is called The Girl from Samos, or Samia, and that was discovered in 1907. So we don't have quite the tradition of scholarship on Menander that some of our other authors from antiquity have. Now, when I say whole plays, that means that we have many, many, many fragments of other plays, just bits and pieces that we can take a look at completely out of context and learn some things about his style and his plot devices and his narratives and how he liked to put plays together. But we only have these two main full plays. A little bit more about Menander. He lived from about 342 to 292 BCE, and he produced over 100 plays in the course of his 30-year career. Now, he was not the only New Comedy playwright, but he was most likely the most successful. And we know that he was the most successful based on some of the information that we have from scholarship from the ancient world, authors and scholars who were living around Menander's time and a little bit later were the ones who were doing the collecting of all of his plays, making additions, and kind of deciding which belonged in the Menander canon, so to say, which were the most important. And so based on the lists and all of the work that those early scholars did, we know the names of many of his contemporaries, but again, we don't have any of their full plays that we can look at and compare them to Menander. Another thing that made Menander really important and that kept his name fresh for hundreds and hundreds of years is the fact that he was favored by later authors, in particular the Roman playwrights Terence and Plautus, and we're going to read some Plautus for our next unit. These Roman authors copied and adapted many of Menander's plays. So even though we don't have Menander's works themselves, we can look at the adaptations and we can look at their copies and get a sense of what he might have been up to. And once he was copied by the Roman authors, Terence and Plautus, he eventually was resurrected in the Renaissance when authors like Shakespeare found Terence and Plautus and read them in Latin. Those authors were also kind of unknowingly learning more about Menander too. But we'll talk about that a little bit more down the line. Okay, so understanding Dyskolos a little bit better. Now again, I really recommend that you look at the reading guide that I've put together for you, especially because I try to map out as much as I can the various acts. There are 5 acts in every new comedy. Each act usually has something like 3 interactions between different characters, 3 to 4 interactions between the different characters. So there's a lot that goes on in each act. So if you think about acts being broken down into scenes, a lot of this structure that we feel is pretty common today was actually innovated by the new comedians in the Greek world. So please take a look at that reading guide to help you understand a little bit better how the narrative is going to unfold. And I also recommend that you take a look again at the other PowerPoint which talks about stock characters, because that's going to be another really important feature for understanding Dyskolos and understanding these plays going forward. Okay, so we're going to break this down according to the 2 families that are discussed in Dyskolos. The first is the family of Sostratos, and Sostratos is our young man in love, our protagonist. And the other family is the family of Cnemon, and Cnemon is the Dyskolos. Dyskolos means grouch or difficult man. So Cnemon is the father of the object of Sostratos's affection. So let's start with Sostratos's family. His father's name is Callipides, and his mother isn't named in this particular play. All right, but they do have a son named Sostratos. So there is also a sister who does not have a name and is mentioned only once. So that is their sort of nuclear family. These are all free men and free women. In the very first scene, we also have mention of Chaereas, who is one of Sostratos's friends and who would be an early representation of the parasite stock character, a friend who's not exactly a friend. He's not beholden to the family, he's not a slave, and he's not a servant, but he's Sostratos's friend in that he can mooch off of him. So he'll fix some problems, or he'll fix some relationship issues, but always in some sort of, in looking for something in return from the men that he befriends. Okay, so now looking at the slaves that belong to Sostratos's family, Pyrrhus, who shows up in the first act, is the town slave. So Callipides is a wealthy man. He has homes in both the town and in the country. And Pyrrhus comes to the country with Sostratos and with Chaereas at the beginning. And then Gedus is their country slave. So he is there towards the middle of the play when the mother wants to set up a lunch outside the shrine of Pan and the nymphs, and Geddes is there to help make that happen. And for that lunch, for that sacrifice meal, they also hire a cook named Sikon. So Sikon is not part of their household like Pyrrhus and Geddes is, but he is a servant, but he's also being paid. So he can work for lots of different families. He's not owned by them. Okay, so let's look at the other family. The father figure is Cnemon, our Dyskolos, our unpleasant man, and he is married to a woman named Myrrhine. Myrrhine is not a speaking role, and in fact, they are separated at the time when the play begins. Cnemon and Myrrhine have a daughter, and the daughter is not named. She is just referred to as the girl throughout the play, but she is the object of Sostratus's affection. Myrrhine also has a son from her first marriage. She was a widow when she married Cnemon, and his name is Gorgias. So Gorgias owns a farm right next to Cnemon's farm, and he works very hard. And you get the sense that he is keeping an eye out on his half-sister as much as he can, and his mother, Myrrhine, lives with him instead of living with her husband, Cnemon. Now, they are a much less wealthy family than Sostratus's family. So Gorgias has only one slave. His name is Daos, and Gorgias and Daos are often written together. They work together out in the fields, and Daos comes and lives with them and is very much a part of their family. Simike is Cnemon's house slave. That she's an old woman, and she has very few lines. She appears mostly to announce that a mattock, which is kind of like a hoe, has fallen into the well along with the bucket that the girl had dropped in earlier, and to kind of chide Cnemon for being a grouch and for being antisocial, but otherwise she doesn't really have many other functions. Okay, so when we think about our stock characters, remember, old men are very important. So for us, that means Kallipodes and Cnemon are going to be our quote-unquote old men. They're the fathers. So Kallipodes is a very indulgent father, but Cnemon is a very difficult father. So we have two different figures. Mother would be the lady of the house, but she has very few lines, and she doesn't really even have a name. So we're not really going to consider her one of the stock characters. And the same with Myrrhine, who doesn't even speak. Sostratus is, of course, the son who's in love, and the girl the object of her affection. Chaereas is the parasite, and Gorgias is really more like a friend for Sostratus. He's an equal. The only difference between them is the amount of money that they have. So Gorgias doesn't really fit into one of our molds of the stock characters that we already know. Pyrrhus and Geddes are essentially clever slaves. So is Daos. Simike is, she's not clever and she's not dumb. She's just a slave. There's really not much to her. And Sikon is definitely the very big personality cook. These servants who come in sort of as free agents into the family always have very big personalities and tend to have scenes written specifically for them where their comedic virtues can really be shown off. Okay, so I hope this helps you understand a little bit more how the families are set up and who belongs to which family and how they're all related. I hope you enjoy reading Dyskolos, and we'll talk about it on Monday.